to see you all and all our friends and partners here. Um, and welcome to the Nebraska Water Conference, the annual conference we host every year. I am Chittaranjan Ray, Director of Nebraska Water Center. So as you might have noticed that we have been moving around the state for so many years. For last 3 years, first in Norfolk, then Scottsbluff, last year in Kearney, now back in the east, and now we are looking into the urban water issues. Last three conferences were focused on regional issues, more ag water related. So with this, I also want to recognize the two of our staff members. Actually, in the last year only, we recruited two folks in our team. Anne Briggs here, she will come up here, you'll see her. She is our public relations and engagement coordinator. And Professor Karina Schoengold, she is our new associate director. She just came in last July. So with that, you are in good hands actually. So I'm going to hand over the podium to Anne, and she is going to give you all the details. So thank you so much, and we look forward to see you here the next 2 days. Thanks.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Chittaranjan mentioned, I'm Anne Briggs. I'm the Public Relations and Engagement Coordinator, and we are so glad that you have joined us for the next 2 days of conference programming. As you know, we are focusing on urban water issues. We're excited to bring some interactive components to the conference as well, so some workouts and some workshops in the breakout sessions, some tours scheduled for tomorrow, and so I hope you learn a lot, I hope you have fun, and I also hope you meet some fun people while we're at it. I have a few conference reminders for you that I'll pull up here. So first, I hope you grabbed a paper agenda when you checked in. There's both an overview and a full detailed agenda in there. And you'll see QR codes sprinkled throughout the agenda. Those go straight to the abstracts and bios for our speakers. So if you're looking for more information about sessions, turn to that page, scan the QR code, and you'll see all the information that you need. We also have information about parking and about the menu and details for tonight's event as well. And if you're looking for additional details, you can go to our website, go.unl.edu/waterconference. And with that, I will invite our first panel to come up. So this opening panel is going to introduce the history of water management in Eastern Nebraska, specifically in the metro areas. So we have representatives from the City of Lincoln, City of Omaha, and the Metropolitan Utilities District. They're going to share with us, and then we have some prepared questions as well as some time for Q&A. So to moderate this panel, we have Dr. Karina Schoengold. As Chittaranjan mentioned, she is our new Associate Director for the Water Center. So with that, I will turn it over to our panel and to Karina.
Thanks, Anne. I really appreciate the welcome, and thank you and welcome to everyone. I'm glad everyone's with us today. We're going to have some time to hear from each of our panelists, and then we're also going to have we have some questions that we've prepared for them, and we'll also have some time for discussion and questions from the audience. We'll start first with Steve Owen. Steve is the Superintendent of Water Production and Treatment at the Lincoln Water System.
Well, thank you for the invite. This panel is really charged with talking about how we manage water resources in an urban environment. Karina mentioned that I'm the Lincoln Water System Division Manager, and so I'm going to talk more from a perspective of public water supply. But if you look at how we manage water resources in the confines of the city of Lincoln, there are several agencies and departments that really watch over the resource. Those dark blue ovals are divisions that are underneath the Lincoln Transportation and Utilities Department. That is headed by Director Liz Elliott. And on the utility side, we have the Lincoln Water System, the Lincoln wastewater system, and our watershed management division. Those are operational divisions, but we also depend quite a bit on the Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department to help us specifically with enforcement on our MS4 stormwater permit, as well as governing private wells within the city of Lincoln and Lancaster County. And of course, as always, we have a partnership with the Lower Platte South NRD in matters of floodplain and water quality management. So really, those are the agencies and the groups that sort of collectively manage water resources within the city of Lincoln. And I'm going to talk specifically about these sort of operating divisions and really what they do, and then in my comments with some specific challenges that we're dealing with in the public water supply side of things. You look over on our wastewater system division, they're doing some really significant, big things when it comes to resource management. So they have developed biogas and gas recovery systems at the facilities, and biosolids recovery and biosolids application. So they're doing, in fact, they've really reinvented themselves, and they're calling their facilities the Lincoln Resource Recovery Facilities, because they are really recovering resources from the wastewater, again, through the biosolids application program and gas recovery. They also provide cooling water to the Salt Valley Generating Station. So LAS is our local electric provider in Lincoln. They have a large generating station just north of the interstate. Can't really see it, but it's just north of the interstate between 70th and 84th Street. And they're providing cooling water to that facility. And then more recently, they're providing both cooling and heating water to Innovation Campus. So they're doing all they can to really recover resources from the wastewater. On our watershed management division, they're charged principally with enforcing or administering the MS4 stormwater permit for the city of Lincoln, along with cooperation from the Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department. They're involved in flood and water quality protection projects and floodplain and drainage projects. And again, they work pretty extensively with the Lower Platte South NRD. And you notice on the slide I've mentioned two of those divisions are enterprise funds. One is not an enterprise fund. So the significance of that is our wastewater and water facilities are funded by ratepayers. And that makes operating those facilities a little bit easier. If you're sitting over in the watershed division, that area is funded by general obligation bonds, general fund, and grants. And for those of you that are involved in those funding sources, that can be quite a chore to pull off, especially if you're an operating division. So there has been some discussion about attempting to invent a stormwater utility and fund it through rates. So the next three slides are just really kind of the top three challenges, the top three things that Lincoln Water System is dealing with. I've got a presentation tomorrow to talk about our Water 2.0 project. I'm not going to go into that in any detail here, but Lincoln is right on the verge of developing a second water source. We're calling it Water 2.0, and I'll provide some details on that project tomorrow in another session. But really, the whole idea about developing this second water source comes down to resiliency and redundancy of our supply. Doug may visit or mention that in his comments. MUD talks about the triangle of reliability simply because they're connected to two sources of water, the Missouri River and two connections on the Platte River. And Lincoln has a single source of water. It's a well field along the Platte River near Ashland, Nebraska. And back in 2013, we all woke up to this story. I don't know if you can read, especially in the back of the room, read the fine print here, but there was a graduate student in the University of Florida that looked at communities across the United States and did an assessment on how vulnerable they are to water shortages. And Lincoln wound up as third on that list. So when this article was posted in the Huffington Post, I think you can find it pretty easily on the internet. Never really got traction in Lincoln. We oddly enough, we thought that this was going to be talked about quite a bit in the press. It really wasn't. Kind of a funny story. My wife was in the mayor's office at the time that this came out with Mayor Beitler's administration, and we really thought that this was going to be an issue. Obviously, you don't want to be on that list of communities that are vulnerable to water shortages. Never really did a lot of research in the work that was done. We think it was maybe a bit flawed. Certainly, we've had cases where we've had water shortages either as a result of drought or flooding. But we believe some of the conclusions were perhaps a bit overdone. But whether the perceptions are real or correct, there are perceptions, and we have been concerned about this, and it's really what's driving us, and is the reason that we're looking for, again, another source of water for the city of Lincoln. So disruptions to supply in 2019. I'm sure many of you in the audience were either directly or indirectly affected by the flooding in 2019. We lost a number of our facilities and assets as a result of the flooding, and we were down to minimal supplies, water supply coming to Lincoln. So that was a good example, a good reminder to us that having a single source of water supply, it is vulnerable to disruptions. The idea about level of service to customers, I don't think we'd ever get to a point of the well runs dry, so to speak, and our customers wouldn't have water. But you also have to be careful about how much you message to your customers that you may have shortages of water supply. What I mean by that is during times of drought, when you're messaging to your customers that you don't have enough water, and you're doing that through enacting water conservation efforts. We came close this year. We enacted voluntary water conservation efforts. We probably came fairly close to enacting mandatory efforts. Fortunately, we got some rainfall in July that kept us from doing that. The last time we did that was in 2012, and the time before that was in 2002. So from a customer standpoint, every 10 years is probably reasonable. If we start having to enact or at least talk about constant efforts towards voluntary or mandatory water conservation, I think our customers would grow weary of that. So that's what I mean by level of service. Having a second source of water supply will help mitigate that. And finally, economic development. I mean, more and more as we see industry coming in and paying some attention to Lincoln, one of the first few questions they ask is, test, test? Is that what I'm supposed to say when the mic goes out? Yeah. Okay. Okay. I can also talk real loud. Yeah, so this whole idea about economic development, when industry and large businesses come in and show an interest in Lincoln, one of the first few questions they ask is, what is your water supply? What is your capacity? How vulnerable is it to shortages? And do you have a sufficient supply to reach into future years? And so more and more, water supply is very important for economic development. Okay, switch gears. Lead and copper, and Doug may be visiting about this also. Probably if you invited any water utility across the country, large water utility, up to this panel, asked them to talk about what their challenges are, lead and copper, lead service line replacements are going to be on the list. It is a huge huge effort if you choose to take it on. And in some cases, you're not going to have a choice. So the acronym, the LCRR and the LCRI, are referring to EPA's efforts to better regulate lead at the tap. So LCRR is the Lead and Copper Rule revisions. That is a statute or a regulation that has been passed. Right now, the Lead and Copper Rule improvements are continuing to be developed. And so this is all post-Flint, Michigan. If you haven't heard that story, we could probably have a whole panel talking about Flint, Michigan. But essentially what happened in Flint, the very short story is they were having some issues with finances. Some folks came in, made some decisions to change the source of water. A different chemistry of water came into their distribution system. It was a more corrosive water, and it began to elevate lead levels. The lead is coming from premise plumbing or from plumbing materials that are inside homes and businesses. Doug and I don't put lead in the water. And so it's very important to remind yourself that this is something that's happening inside the customer's home. And for both Lincoln and Omaha and MUD, the customer owns the entire service. That's correct. The customer owns the entire service. And so now we're being responsible for the water quality from a component that's under private ownership. It's just crazy. 20 years ago, I never thought that we would be thinking about us as a water utility being responsible for mitigating this. In the end, it makes sense. Lead is a very toxic chemical. Flint, Michigan would be a good example of significant exposures occurring because of this phenomenon. And especially lead is very dangerous to children and young folks. So it does make sense, but it's going to be a heavy lift for the utilities. In Lincoln, you look at this chart, shows 1,900 lead water services. That's by records, so we keep records. These records can date back clear to the late 1800s. And so by record, we show about 1,900 lead water services, but that's not where it ends. You're guilty until proven innocent with the lead and copper rule, the new lead and copper rule that has come out. So you have to prove, if your records don't show beyond a reasonable doubt that it's not lead, then you're going to have to go and investigate that. So that really means going out on site, either getting into the customer's home or going out into the right-of-way and uncovering the water service that goes into the home and verifying what the material is. The other component that you're going to have to be concerned about is galvanized lines. So for the city of Lincoln, back 20 years ago, when we had a water main replacement project and we encountered the first segment of lead service from the valve in the right-of-way to the water main, we would replace that. And we thought we were doing good things. Come to find out, the galvanized portion that's still left in place has the potential of continuing to liberate lead. And so you're giving a false impression to the customer. We got rid of your lead, but there could still be lead by virtue of it accumulating in the galvanized water service. So you put all that together, and we don't have just 1,900 of these water services to contend with. We've got 10,000 of them to figure out. And so we are just in the infancy of beginning to put together a lead service line replacement program. There is federal funding that is available through the SRF loan program. I think there's something like 150 million, Doug, you may have some of this in your presentation, but 150 million that's been carved out maybe for Nebraska. We're looking at maybe around 30 million for the city of Lincoln to get our program going. The dilemma is it's going to take some time to do this. So one of the hardest messages in all of this is going to be how you tell a customer you know what, we've got money, we're gonna be out replacing your service line, but you know, it might be 5 years, might even be 10 years. So it's going to be a very difficult message to provide to our customers. So lastly, this whole idea about infrastructure, this would be sort of, again, on the big hit list for us. We're talking about water 2.0, we're talking about lead service lines. Well, we can't forget about the infrastructure that drives the entire utility. So this is just a conceptual drawing of our water utility. You look up in the upper right hand of the slide, that's our well fields. You'll see Interstate 80 there. So we've got 44 wells and almost 90,000 customers. And in between all of that is this just vast infrastructure of pumps and storage systems and pipelines. And in particular is our water distribution system. So those are the smaller pipelines that feed water to our customers. And those break, they're old. Much of our system are metal pipes, so cast iron and ductile iron pipe, and that does not last forever. There are places in our system that have very corrosive soils, and so we see a high rate of water main breaks in those areas. And so we have to keep our eye on the ball when it comes to taking care and renewing and replacing and repairing our infrastructure. It's very significant. For the next 6 years, the Lincoln Water System has over $100 million plugged in to try to, again, renew and replace and keep our infrastructure working. So I think that ends my part of the panel discussion. So.
All right. Thank you very much. That was really informative. Next, we'll hear from Jim Theiler. Jim is the Assistant Director of the City of Omaha Public Works.
Thanks, everyone. I could have taken everything that Steve said there about Lincoln and just said, well, just replace that with Omaha because we're dealing with the same things. Oops. So I just want to start by inviting everyone. I know there's a tonight. There's at the Gene Leahy Mall. There's a dinner at the Gene Leahy Mall, and if you get a chance to walk around the mall, head down to the riverfront. It's brand new. There's a lot of money just that went in there. It's something to see. So if you've seen it, go see it again. If you're in here from out of town, go check out our riverfront. That's why we're all here, for water resources. And our riverfront's just been just a lot of new things happening down there. So a couple things I wanted to touch base on. Few demographics about the city of Omaha and why water is so important here. We're just under 500,000 people here in the city limits. We are about 150 square miles city limits. We are very close to 1 million for the metropolitan area. Very important to the city of Omaha. 3 rivers are here. The Missouri River forms our eastern border. And if you look at the whole metro area, the mouth of the Platte River is in our metro area, and where the Elkhorn River joins the Platte River, that's also in our metro area. So very important to the state of Nebraska, those 3 rivers, very important for the city of Omaha. Kind of like Steve did, I have a specialty area. My areas with public works is primarily, I've come up through wastewater treatment, but there's a lot of governance outside of what I do that I wanted to talk about a little bit, like Steve did with the city of Lincoln. So Omaha Public Works, we play a vital role in some of the governance, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. Doug's going to talk about MUD. They're our drinking water provider, and Doug's going to talk about them. The Papio Creek, Missouri River NRD, they're a major partner here, and I'll touch base on a few things, what they do in the city of Omaha. And also we have what's called the Papio Creek Watershed Partnership, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And I did also, I wanted to touch base on some major concerns we have, key issues we have dealing with water here in the city of Omaha. Aging infrastructure. Omaha has been here since the 1850s, and we have things underground still operating that have been there since the 1850s. That includes some of our water distribution system. That includes some of the pipes that collect wastewater. Sewer number 2 was built in 1890. It's still functioning. It's a 4-ring brick sewer constructed by brick. It's 144 inches in diameter. That's carrying a lot of the flow in the city, downtown area of the city of Omaha. So, and they used to number them. That's sewer number 2. Number 1, that was abandoned, but number 2 still exists. Can't just talk about aging infrastructure. We're also dealing with an aging workforce. And so a lot of the people that have the institutional knowledge of what's underground or how we've dealt with things in the past, they have retired. Something we're facing. And this last one I want to talk about, and I'll call it unfunded federally mandated regulatory issues, and that's not a bad thing. Okay, the regulations are good. The regulations are what drive the city of Omaha to have a $2 billion combined sewer overflow program. Okay, the regulations are what's driving Omaha to have a soon-to-be $600 to $700 million secondary treatment expansion at our wastewater treatment plant. The regulations are good. The problem is, how do you pay for them? And so that's just a challenge we face here in the city of Omaha, is we have to keep raising the rates to pay for these challenges. As Steve talked about, we have some of these programs that aren't rate driven, and like Steve talked about in Lincoln, the watershed that has to compete for geo bonds has no money or very little money. So that's a challenge. Just I'll touch base here on a few things with the City of Omaha Public Works and what we're responsible for, specifically wastewater treatment. And again, the City of Omaha is the only permitted city in the state of Nebraska with a permitted combined sewer overflow permit. Plattsmouth had one. They separated their sewers. There's probably some things that exist around the state that are out there, but they're not permitted. Omaha has over 45 square miles of combined sewers, and we have been in the process of working with the state of Nebraska for almost 15 years now, and we'll be doing so for the next 15 years to meet the federal requirements for that combined sewer program. Wastewater treatment. Again, we are a regional provider for the metro area. We have 2 major water resource recovery facilities, and I'm glad that Steve talked about Lincoln and all the things they're doing for resource recovery. And they're doing some great things. We're just a couple years behind them on some of what they're doing, but we're doing more at our wastewater treatment plants to cover those resources that come down the pipe and utilize them in a beneficial way. About 300 square miles we serve with wastewater treatment. About 750,000 population of that metro area. That's almost 1 million. About 750,000 come to our 2 wastewater treatment plants. I did talk about our 45 square mile combined sewer area that's in the eastern part of the city. That's the area that was built primarily pre-1950 in the city of Omaha. That's served by combined sewers that we've been working to address for many years. And our collection system consists of over 2,000 miles of pipe below ground. Flood control. We are responsible for flood control on the Missouri River side as the city of Omaha. And the green line you see there, that's our 13-mile flood control system. 1 mile of flood wall in the downtown area, 13 miles of levee that protected us against a flood in 2011 and a flood in 2019. And those were two major catastrophic floods that we had to battle here in the last decade or so. A few statistics about that flood control system on the Missouri River side. It was built in the 1950s, and it was built. It was a federally funded and built by the Corps of Engineers. We are now responsible for it, but we have to answer to the Corps of Engineers on making sure it's kept up to the standards. 53 drainage structures. I've just kind of pulled this slide from someone else's presentation. Railroad enclosures, relief wells. It's not just a big pile of dirt that you see there with the levee. There's so much involved in levee management that you don't see that's there to protect the city from flooding. And like I did say, in 2011, we had a flood that lasted over 100 days at the 100-year flood elevation. In 2019, we, along with most of the rest of the state, we had a catastrophic flood down at our treatment plant where it came over the levees and we had to abandon that plant. But so we've had to battle a lot of things with our flood control system. That's something on the Missouri River side that we maintain for the city of Omaha. I want to talk about some of our partners, and I'm just relaying some information that other people know a lot more about. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the Papio NRD, I think I see Amanda out there and Lori's out there. Talk to them. They know a lot more than I'm going to present in a couple slides. But the Papio Creek watershed is a major watershed that is the city of Omaha metro area. 420 square miles, over a third of the state's population live in this watershed. So that's something unique that Omaha deals with in the state
MUD still has some of the areas that is not ours. I'm going to use the city of Plattsmouth, Nebraska as an example. Plattsmouth was severely hampered by the recent floods. I don't know if you've seen in the news, they're having more issues with their treatment facility right now. They have come to us as a community and said, can you help? And we are working with them. There's a couple other communities in the metro area as well that are not part of the MUD system. So just that expansion of our already existing facilities and taking on additional customers. Is it a problem in the watershed? Maybe not, because it's kind of you're trading. They're getting their water from the Platte River. I'm getting my water from the Platte River. It's just going to go through a little more modern treatment facility, maybe, kind of a thing. But that's kind of one of the issues I see coming for us, is just that it's not easy to run a water utility, and some of these smaller ones are going to struggle as the regulations get worse and worse for them.
And I promise not to get on a rant, but Jim, you had mentioned competition for funds. I'm getting old, and so when my parents talked about essential services, it was water, garbage, wastewater, and now it's cell phones and internet. And so, folks only have a certain disposable income, and the competition for that it's going to be incredible. I would just add to what Doug had mentioned earlier about these emerging contaminants. I think that is going to be, and back to the whole funding thing, that is going to be a challenge for water utilities. And on the hit list now is nitrates. Doug mentioned PFAS, Legionella, oddly enough. Again, it's not something that Doug and I put in the water or is in the water, but it's another premise plumbing issue, because Legionella can develop in stagnant water in elevated temperatures. So there's just this almost unlimited number of contaminants that we're going to have to deal with. And the detection limits, the detection levels, the method detection levels are becoming lower and lower. So on the PFAS that Doug mentioned, we're talking about parts per trillion. And that's what it appears the MCLs will be coming out, parts per trillion. And then how do you message that back to your consumers? We have to every year publish a consumer confidence report. And that's one of our fundamental things as a public water supplier, is to maintain consumer confidence on the product that we provide. I worked for a person for many years that talked about public water suppliers are the largest beverage providers in their communities. And we have to make sure it's safe. Trying to figure out how to message these emerging contaminants to our customers is really going to be a chore.
Now, I think I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience now, since I also was going to ask about preparing for those, but you've addressed a bit about how we start to approach those with moving forward. So I'd like to approach audience. We are open for questions. We have a microphone in the aisle. You can come to the mic, ask questions, or yell really loud if you feel more comfortable doing that. And maybe introduce yourself when you come up as well, so that we
Good morning. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, it was really a great talk by all three of you, and we learned a lot. So you talked about this contaminants, and EPA starts giving new regulations as we know more about water quality issues. How does these agencies put in the budget, like parts per trillion? I'm guessing it will cost a lot to do those water quality analysis. So how that budgetary requirement is fulfilled by because you do have a budget limitations, right? So how do you put in these new challenges on water quality side? And I'm Arinda Malakar from Nebraska Water Center. Sorry, I did that later.
So, did everyone hear the question? No? I see some no's. The question was generally about how to sort of pay for pay for these new contaminant issues, choose where to focus and sort of broadly related to those questions about management.
I'll take a stab at this, and I'll use PFAS as we don't know exactly what we're going to have to do for PFAS, but the way we will work with the state of Nebraska in our discharge permits is that once the state understands what the regulation is, our discharge permit is going to require us to do something. But until that time, we're not putting anything in the budget because we don't know what the target is. Once we know what the target is, then we have a permit with the state of Nebraska as wastewater to discharge into waters of the state. So once we know what the target is, and the state gives us a permit limit, or what we have to do with our pre-treatment system because again, we don't produce it, it's coming at us. So once we understand what we're required to do from the state through our permit, then we're going to be able to sit down and say, okay, on the discharge side, maybe we don't have to do anything, but we have to do these many more lab tests, and so we can budget for that.
Years ago, we had something called the Clean Water Act reauthorization and the Safe Drinking Water Act reauthorization. They happen quite regularly. I was just wondering, in my naive view, I don't believe the Safe Drinking Water Act has actually been completely reauthorized for quite a while, and the Clean Water Act perhaps even longer. So my question is this a good thing or a bad thing for states and local municipalities that have to deliver this water? Is when let's say there's a new contaminant that comes down as being part of that list of the regulated contaminants, when EPA acts to make this a federal regulation, is there money that comes to you to be able to help you with that, is one part of that question. And I guess my second part is, my sense is that perhaps predictability within the federal government would be a good thing, but I'd like to know your take on that. Thank you.
Did everyone hear the question? Okay.
Thanks, Susan. Tough question. So I think first of all, we believe the science, and it's all about making sure customers get a safe product. So we are going to bemoan the fact that these regulations cost money, but we're also going to believe the science from the health standpoint. And I think both Jim and Doug had touched on that. And so it is our duty then to enact further treatment or some processes or procedures to limit exposure of our customers. Our expectation is that there is funding that then comes behind that to help us fund these programs, and we hope that there isn't those folks, those elected officials that make those decisions for funding, forget about some of the other things that we have in front of us. So all of us talked about this idea about maintaining existing infrastructure. We absolutely can't forget about that. So these are additional funding increments to take care of the treatment process. Jim reminded me about, for Lincoln Water, another huge issue when it comes to these regulations will be our NPDES discharge permit. We're up for another renewal, and we've committed to doing some pretty significant treatment of our discharge. A lot of people wouldn't think that you have discharge from a water treatment plant that needs to meet limits. Huge effort on our part in the next 5 to 10 years. Probably not answering your question, but as far as the Safe Drinking Water Act goes, every 5 years the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule comes out, and that's then where we are looking at these emerging contaminants. So there is some reason that EPA thinks that there is a particular contaminant that has health concerns. And for instance, the PFAS that we've been talking about on the public water supply, that's part of the unregulated contaminant rule number 5. So all water utilities across the country are actively going out and sampling for PFAS as we speak.
I just want to say that's a really great update on the new process, and kind of it sounds like it's more as it comes up. That's when you guys get busy, and hopefully EPA does keep some funding in mind with that. Thank you.
Any other comments or okay. Another question, please?
We've been talking a lot about different types of contaminants, and I'm aware that I believe it's UNMC has recognized that we have a lot of physical issues, particularly here in Nebraska. And I'm wondering how we approach special things that we're finding in Nebraska with pediatric brain cancers, lymphomas, etc. And what are we doing to address some of those issues? Because it seems to be not much in the news. We hear a lot about nitrates, which is very important, but where I'm not seeing as much about these other areas of concern that are affecting our children, our future, and of course our entire population. Thank you.
I'll see if I can answer this one for you. And you mentioned UNMC, and there's a lot of work that the UNMC does behind the scenes related to studies that some I'm aware of, a lot of them I'm probably not aware of, where they're taking on these studies, a lot of them in partnership with the University of Lincoln. And I think the point I wanted to make is we're lucky that we have the Med Center in the state of Nebraska. We're lucky that we have an organization with that much brain power there to look into some of these issues. I'm not the expert that can say all the work they're doing. We've been in partnership with them in looking at our wastewater, and we are still tracking the COVID that's in the wastewater system with UNMC as a partner. So they're a great partner. We're lucky we have them in the state. I can't answer some of the specifics you're talking about, but they do a lot of work in the areas you're talking about. I hope that helped.
All right, we're getting close. Other comments on that? Or? All right, we probably have time for maybe one final question.
Yeah, I'm Chittaranjan from the Nebraska Water Center. All of you talked about some activities going on within your utilities about climate challenges and things like that. So now I'm pretty sure that some of you are looking into reducing the carbon footprint of your operation, especially treatment plants and reducing methane emission from the wastewater treatment plants. But that also involves cost. So how are you managing that? There is probably are there federal funds available to address those reduction in emission, or how are you managing those?
I'll talk about in Omaha and something, again, we're a little behind Lincoln in this area, but we're starting our climate action plan, and the climate action plans now are being funded through a federal program. Once the plan's developed, then the cities and states with plans will be eligible for funds that are supposed to be out there. So we're just kind of embarking on that, but that's specific to the climate action plan and funds that are available through that. You know, as far as water and wastewater funding, it's has always been a shortfall at the federal level. You know, with transportation, there's a thing called a gas tax, and that funds on a lot of the transportation projects 80% what gets built. We don't have a water, wastewater federal tax that can be distributed back to the states. And I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, but that's why transportation's been funded in the past, and that's why water and wastewater hasn't. And so that's an issue that's through climate action, I see some funds that are going to be out there in the future. We don't know exactly what they're going to be, but otherwise for water and wastewater, those would have had to been investments that we saw ourselves that made sense to make.
For us, it's simply the replacement of really old, inefficient equipment with newer, more efficient equipment. You know, as we replace things and update, we're constantly looking at not just the life cycle cost, but also those emissions issues. And it is a balancing act because, you know, somebody has to pay for this. So you've got to make sure you're keeping your customers' dollars in mind as you make these decisions. But for us, a lot of it's just natural progression of updates.
I guess speaking a little bit for our wastewater division, you know, we talk about resource recovery, so biosolids and gas recovery, and also the value for the cooling water. Those resources that we're recovering from the wastewater have value, and I think while they'll not pay necessarily for the full cost of those recoveries, I think we have to recognize that those things do have value. And we've got to challenge the elected officials to make sure there are incentives to attach the value to those components. The sale of biosolids, the sale of gas, the sale of the treated water for cooling.
All right, and I think we are right on time. So thank you very much to our panelists. I really appreciate the opportunity to hear a little bit about the urban water side. I know from my own perspective, I do a lot of work on ag water use, so this is a whole nother side of water that I don't often think about, but is really important for all of us and understanding some of these challenges. So let's have a round of applause for our panelists.